Live from London, this is BBC News. At least 69 people, including 21 children, are now known to have died in devastating flash floods that swept through parts of central Texas. 11 girls attending a summer camp are still missing. Indirect talks between Israel and Hamas are due to begin in Qatar, aimed at reaching a ceasefire in Gaza and a deal to release hostages. Meanwhile, health officials in Gaza say Israeli airstrikes have killed more than 30 Palestinians. Chinese leader Xi Jinping skips the latest BRICS summit of developing nations, currently taking place in Brazil, while Russian President Vladimir Putin attends online. And Eurostar passengers say they were left stranded in baking heat for more than 4 hours after a train bound for London broke down. Hello, I'm Lauren Taylor. A huge search and rescue operation is continuing in Texas to try to find survivors of the devastating flash floods which tore through parts of the state in the early hours of Friday. At least 69 people are now known to have been killed after floods across central Texas. Hundreds of rescuers continue to search for 11 children who were swept away while staying at a summer camp in Kerr County on the edge of the Guadalupe River. US President Donald Trump says he has signed a major disaster declaration for the county where more heavy rain is forecast. Joe Inwood reports.
For many, this was the only way to escape the rising, raging waters of the Guadalupe River. This footage, just released by the US Coast Guard, shows one of the rescues they carried out on Friday as flash floods swept through parts of Texas. And this is what was left in its wake at Camp Mystic, a Christian holiday camp for young girls. Michael had no idea where his daughter was or if she had survived.
We got here and started looking and the game warden showed up, or we went as far as we could downstream. But we don't have the equipment for that, so we're letting them do that, and then we're looking for places that they're gonna potentially be alive.
They were amongst more than 700 girls camping along the river to celebrate US Independence Day, when more than a month's worth of rain fell in just a few hours. And it was not just the Guadalupe that burst its banks. This was the San Gabriel River in Georgetown, about 28 miles outside of Austin. More than 850 people needed rescuing, but many did not make it. Including Jane Ragsdale, described as the heart and soul of the camp where she worked. Julian Ryan, whose final words to his fiancée were, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to make it. I love you all." And 8-year-old Renee, whose family said she was having the time of her life. She was at Camp Mystic, where much of the rescue has been focused. Today, Pope Leo, who is from the US, said the girls were in his prayers.
I would like to express sincere condolences to all the families who have lost loved ones, in particular their daughters who were at summer camp in the disaster caused by the flooding of the Guadalupe River in Texas in the United States. We pray for them.
Authorities were seemingly caught off guard by the speed of the flooding. But at a press conference in the last few hours, local officials did not want to discuss the issue.
We want to make sure that we continue to focus. We still have 11 missing children that we want to get reunited with our families. Until we can get reunited with our families, we are not going to stop. We are not going to stop until we do. So, thank you.
One quick follow-up question, sir. Was any emergency alert given out on the 4th that morning of? Did anyone get any alert?
Sir, there are families who deserve better than that.
And now more rain has been forecast, with a warning that the floodwaters could return. Even as the search continues, Texas is bracing itself once again. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Brian Trasher is Vice President of the Cajun Navy, a non-profit organisation that provides disaster relief across the United States. He says that rescue workers are facing unprecedented conditions.
We first got involved early Friday morning when we saw the alerts coming across about the flooding and that there was potential fatalities and missing persons. We got called by some members of Congress to see if we could scramble any assets. We're set up structurally like with state chapters. So we have a chapter of the United Cajun Navy in Texas, and we called over there. We were able to get some of our volunteers to deploy 4 airboats over to the Kerrville area and get them in the water and start running downstream from where a lot of those structures got washed out and people were reported missing from. We sent a second wave in yesterday, and we have one of our search and rescue teams on the ground there supporting the boat teams, and we're just doing everything we can to try to be a force multiplier for the Coast Guard and for Texas officials who have been just doing a magnificent job in the last 48, 55 hours.
And how difficult is it to coordinate with other organisations, as you mentioned, like the Coast Guard?
That's correct. Yeah, we will basically take some guidance as to where we don't kind of get in their way, but we went a little downstream from where they were looking, just so that we were sure that nothing was passing them up, if that makes sense.
And there are still warnings, aren't there, of more flooding and more potential flash flooding coming. What are your teams telling you about how difficult it is to operate there?
It is very difficult, and that's why we sent some of our high water vehicles over. We actually we partner with a group called Mission Mules. You might have seen, I think you guys reported on it in North Carolina after Hurricane Helene, the mules that went up into the mountains with us, with the Cajun Navy, and delivered Starlink units and generators to get people back connected. They're on their way over there as well. The weather system that came up was remnants of Tropical Storm Barry that moved up the Mexican coast into Texas and produced just a torrential amount of rainfall. And of course, Texas Hill Country, everybody knows gravity, water goes down, and unfortunately washed out a lot of these small communities, and also happens to be where a lot of summer camps are for children.
Indirect talks between Israel and Hamas are due to begin in Qatar, aimed at reaching a ceasefire and hostage release agreement. The diplomatic development comes as health officials in Gaza say nearly 50 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes so far today. Hamas is seeking assurances from the talks that fighting will not resume if negotiations for a permanent truce break down. Israel says that's unacceptable. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is flying to Washington for direct talks with President Trump tomorrow amid growing pressure to end the war. Our Middle East regional editor Sebastian Usher has been following the negotiations from Jerusalem.
A senior Hamas official told the BBC that the talks were starting at 8 p.m. Qatar time, which is more than an hour ago now. We haven't heard anything more from it. We also heard from that official that the Hamas negotiating team had been holding talks ahead of these indirect talks with the Israeli team, which arrived later in the day with Qatari and Egyptian mediators. Where we are with these talks is still very open to question. Mr. Netanyahu himself has now left for the US. Before he left, he essentially said that he'd sent the Israeli negotiating team with very clear directives to follow the conditions that the Israeli government has set. And he reiterated essentially what his position has been throughout, which is that he has three missions in Gaza. One is to ensure the release of all the remaining hostages, alive or dead. The other is to ensure that Hamas is essentially eliminated. It's got rid of, it can no longer have a position in Gaza, and that it will have no governance there. Now, that's something which is unclear whether any compromise can be achieved between the Israeli negotiating team and the Hamas negotiating team. What we've heard from sources in Hamas is that their demands haven't changed that much either. They essentially still want a guarantee that after any ceasefire, there won't be a return to hostilities, that essentially the war will be over. It's not quite the precondition that they've been demanding before, but it seems very much that they want to have that as clearly laid out as possible. We've heard that they want the US to guarantee that. Now, that may be, as it's been before, a stumbling block for Israel. The way that Mr. Netanyahu framed it as he was leaving for his visit to the US, where he will be meeting President Trump tomorrow for what will be key talks, is that he hopes that his meeting with President Trump will help move this forward. He wasn't promising more than that, I think, about Gaza. And the meeting that they have, Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu, won't only be focusing on Gaza, will also very much be looking back at the support that the US, that President Trump personally gave to Israel in its recent escalation of its conflict with Iran. So I think as far as Mr. Netanyahu is concerned, the success of his talks with Trump won't depend on whether there's a breakthrough that can be announced about Gaza at that meeting. For Mr. Trump, that may be slightly different. I think he is very impatient to be able to announce something that will get as close as we have for several months to there being a breakthrough and to there being a new ceasefire deal and a new deal to release the remaining hostages in Gaza.
And so in the meantime, the situation dire in Gaza itself, and many more Palestinians killed in Israeli strikes today alone.
Yes, I mean, the different figures, the figures we were hearing earlier today were at least 30 people being killed both in Gaza City. In 2 strikes there, we were hearing from hospital officials on 2 houses, killing 20 people. And then further south in the Al-Mawasi area, which is essentially a tent city where Palestinians have been told throughout the conflict by Israel to take refuge the many times that they've been displaced. But Al-Mawasi is the place where they would be relatively safe. So we've heard that. We've heard higher figures than that as well. Up to 50 people might have been killed today. Israel has said that it has carried out around 130 attacks on Hamas targets in the past 24 hours, command and control centres, but it's killed a number of militants. There's no backing off at the moment in the Israeli offensive against Hamas. And one of my colleagues, Rushdie Abdel-Alouf, was just speaking to a senior Hamas intelligence official who was telling him that the situation, the security situation in Gaza is collapsing, that Hamas is losing control more and more, that this latest offensive by Israel has now taken over 80 to 90% of the territory, and there are other groups that are now rising up as well. So a situation that is becoming more and more chaotic really by the day.
The US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says it's possible a deadline for negotiating some international trade deals could slip beyond the one set by President Trump for July the 9th. Speaking with CNN, Scott Bessent highlighted several trade deals which are still not finalised, including the EU. Our correspondent Arunade Mukherjee has been analysing Mr. Bessent's statements and their implications for Donald Trump's trade war.
Well, one of the important aspects that stood out from the interviews that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave to the U.S. media was one that he said, as we are nearing the deadline of the 9th of July, he said if deals are not arrived at between U.S. and some of those concerned countries, then come 1st of August, they should be ready to pay tariffs based on what the announcements were on the 1st of April, so that on the 2nd of April rather. So that was essentially the big news point that came out from that. His messaging was very clear. He also said that they were looking at possibly some announcements in the next few days leading up to the deadline of the 9th of July. He didn't mention which countries he thought were close, but he said that we were close to stitching agreements with some, and those announcements will be made. Simultaneously, he also said within the next 72 hours, the Trump administration will be sending out letters to multiple countries cautioning them about the deadline and saying that then the tariffs from the 2nd of April that had been announced will come into effect starting the 1st of August. He also pointed out that while conversations with some countries were going well, there were some countries which were also dragging their feet. He didn't mention which countries, but once again, the messaging seems to be that to apply maximum pressure ahead of that deadline so that these deals, which are mutually beneficial to all and from the US's perspective beneficial to the US, comes in. He also highlighted that they were focusing specifically on 18 countries which were considered to be the big trading relationships for the US and which also make up 95% of the US's trade deficit. So those were the countries that Scott Bessent said that the US would be focusing on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that Scott Bessent isn't saying which deals are close, but are any other countries saying from their point of view it's close?
We haven't heard from them, but this is that final stretch. So it would be very crucial for all the countries to try and figure out what they need to do within the 9th of July, because the messaging, as I said, is very clear from the US. Some of those areas or countries that we've heard the Trump administration talk about, for instance, is India, saying that they were very close, but we haven't heard anything yet from both establishments about whether or where they are really with the deal. The other one that we really need to watch out for is what's happening with the bloc of the European Union. We know that in the past, Donald Trump had threatened 20% tariffs on European Union. Then he said that when the conversations were not going very well, he expressed frustration. He threatened to raise that to 50%, following which, you remember, President Trump had said that, well, he's just had a conversation with Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union chief, and he expressed satisfaction. Ursula von der Leyen herself saying that, yes, the talks were progressing swiftly and smoothly, but there are sticking points that remain with all these trading blocs. The European Union in particular would be interesting to watch out for, considering it is one of the US's largest trading partners. So a lot still left, and in that final stretch, it would be very critical for these countries to try and figure out where they are, given the kind of warnings and cautioning that is coming in from the US.
A two-day summit of the BRICS grouping of emerging economies is underway in Brazil. BRICS is named after its founding members, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. It now has 11 members. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, Ethiopia, Indonesia and Iran were recently added. Diplomats meeting for 2 days in Rio. They're expected to present a united front against Donald Trump's trade policies, which BRICS leaders say are potentially damaging to other economies. While not in direct attendance, Russian President Vladimir Putin joined remotely, telling the gathering that the liberal model of globalization was becoming obsolete. Well, David Lubin is a senior research fellow at Chatham House. He says that while Donald Trump's tariffs will be high on the agenda, many countries have reservations about Beijing's growing dominance of the global market.
I don't think opposition to Trump's tariffs policy is anything new for many developing countries. Many countries have voiced opposition to the tariffs in all sorts of different contexts. And BRICS membership does, for many countries, offer a kind of soft way of engaging in an effort of kind of strategic balancing. If the world is becoming bipolar between Washington and Beijing, it makes sense for developing countries to have good relationships with one or other, with both of them. And so for many countries, BRICS membership is a way of kind of tilting towards Beijing without necessarily doing much to upset Washington. But it's worth pointing out that although developing countries, and many developed countries, of course, have plenty to say about Trump's tariff policies, it's also the case that many developing countries are increasingly frustrated with China when it comes to trade. A rapidly growing share of China's overall trade surplus is a trade surplus with other developing countries. And that's become a growing source of frustration for developing countries who don't want their economies swamped by Chinese goods any more than developed countries want their economies swamped by Chinese goods. And in fact, the fastest growing source of hostile trade policies directed at China is coming from the developing world, not from the developed world. And so although developing countries have sort of common cause when it comes to complaints about US trade policy, they're not entirely comfortable with trade policies coming out of China either.
Now it's time for a look at today's sport with Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes.
Thanks very much. Lots of great sport for you. And we're starting at Wimbledon, where the defending champion Carlos Alcaraz is on court right now against Alexander Rublev. Now, he lost the first set to the Russian, 14th seed, but Alcaraz bounced back, comfortably taking the second and the third. So the impetus is with the Spaniard. They've just started the fourth set, and it is going with serve. So 1 game all at the moment in that fourth set. Now, Great Britain has a player in the men's singles quarterfinals after Cameron Norrie held off a fight back from the Chilean qualifier Nicolas Jarry. It went the full 5 sets, but Norrie had been 2 up with a match point in the third set tiebreak. But Jarry pushed him to a decider on court 1, where it was finally decided in Norrie's favour after nearly 4.5 hours.
I think credit to Nico. He did an unbelievable job staying with me, and he played better than me in both tiebreaks, so he deserved it. And I didn't want to let his game style bother me, and I just had to keep fighting. And I think beginning of this year I was struggling a little bit with confidence and had some doubts, and I just wanted to enjoy my tennis a little bit more, and I'm doing that, and I enjoyed it today. So it was a bonus to win, but I'm more happy that I was enjoying and I was playing point for point. So that's what mattered.
Well, Norrie's victory came shortly after Britain's last female in the singles. Sonny Cartal was knocked out, but the game was marred by controversy over an electronic line call. There's more on that on the BBC Sport website, but no such trouble for the world number one, Aryna Sabalenka. She's through to the last 8 without dropping a set all tournament, although Elise Mertens proved a tougher test than today's straight sets victory scoreline suggests. Now let's move on to Formula One, where torrential rain at Silverstone led to a dramatic British Grand Prix. Many drivers could neither see or control their cars, but the race was eventually won by Lando Norris, his first home Grand Prix win, and it was a 1-2 for McLaren because Norris's teammate Oscar Piastri ended up second, although the championship leader would have won it if he hadn't been given a time penalty for breaking safety car rules. The biggest smile, though, went to the Sauber veteran driver Nico Hülkenberg, who finished third, his first Formula One podium after more than 230 races. The result means that Norris is just 8 points behind Piastri in the drivers' standings.
It's always hard to imagine what it's going to be like, but now I'm feeling it, and it's unbelievable. So yeah, thanks to all the fans, all the British fans, all the McLaren fans, and shout out to my grandstand in the corner, because I give all my credits to them. They were amazing. They cheered me on every lap, and it was really a beautiful thing.
On to cricket now, and India have won the second test against England by a huge 336 runs to level the series. They were never going to lose it, really. England needed 536 runs at the start of the day, and they were 3 wickets down. But with a later start due to rain, it could have ended up a draw if it weren't for a superb India bowling display. Akashdeep getting 6 wickets, including the valuable one of Jamie Smith, who was on another big score. This time he was out for 88. England ended up scoring 271 before they were bowled out. A big defeat, which leaves the series tied at 1-1 with 3 matches left to play.
Stood here after a defeat, you know, it's never an easy thing to take. Obviously, it's disappointment, you know, up in that dressing room. But yeah, tough week. You know, credit to India, they played well. They when they really got on top of us, they didn't let it slip. So yeah, it was a disappointing week. But yeah, look, we've got to shut the boots up and get over this one, and then, you know, get our heads onto Lords, because it's a very, very quick turnaround.
Very content, very peaceful to be able to get this win. There were a lot of talks, I think, after the first test match. There were some areas, I think we were really good in most of the areas, even in the first test match. We were very close, but I think a lot of those questions were answered in this test match.
That's the sport. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks very much indeed, Lizzie. Hundreds of Eurostar passengers were left stranded on a train for more than 5 hours today. The service between Brussels and London St Pancras stopped outside Calais, causing lengthy delays. Our correspondent Mark Ashdown has been following the story.
Eurostar service 9117, which left Brussels at about 8:50 local time, and was due into London St Pancras 2 hours later. But about halfway into the journey, 10 minutes outside Calais, it came to a stop, apparently suffered an electrical failure and stayed there for some hours. Now, what followed was 6 hours of passengers tired, fed up, frustrated, taking to social media, as happens in these cases, to share their woes. They complained about a lack of air conditioning, a lack of water, and some toilets that stopped working, one even overflowing all over the carriage. I'll give you a flavour of some people posting. Valentina said, "I'm on this train with 2 small children. There are no toilets, no air. These are inhumane conditions." Andrew Brody said, "No updates, no water, no idea. Been on here 6 hours. Nobody knows what's happening." Now, we spoke with one lady, Lydia Aviles, who contacted us here at the BBC, and she said, I'll quote, "The oxygen dropped, so I started walking around looking for a draft. There was nothing because the doors are sealed. They had to open them manually. A lot of people were freaking out and panicking," she said. "The heat was going up very quickly. That was the scariest part." Now, there were some reports that paramedics were called on board to treat some people who were suffering with the heat, and they took to giving out bottled water as well. A replacement train was promised by Eurostar on social media by 1:30. It didn't arrive till about 4 o'clock local time. The company apologised, saying the rescue train took a bit longer than expected to transfer passengers out in what it called a complex operation, and it thanked passengers for their patience and cooperation. Obviously, this caused some delays across the network. Most Eurostar services from Brussels to London were delayed today, and the company said it would offer those who were stuck on the broken down train a refund, either 100% in cash or 300% of their ticket value in the form of an e-voucher.
Followers of Tibet's exiled spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, have been celebrating his 90th birthday. Thousands have gathered in the Indian town of Dharamshala, despite heavy monsoon rains. Addressing them, the Dalai Lama described himself as a simple Buddhist monk who usually didn't celebrate birthdays. Samira Hussain reports.
He calls himself a simple monk, not one to celebrate birthdays. But when you're 90 years old and you're the Dalai Lama, you get a party.
There's been a week of celebrations, and it's culminating into this big main event. Thousands of people have come to be a part of his celebration.
Festivities brimming with traditional music and merriment, and a message from the Dalai Lama himself.
It is my 90th birthday celebration, and you have happily and with great excitement gathered here, and with joy in your heart you have gathered here. I would like to thank you for that.
But his age raised questions about his succession, which he assuaged earlier this week. His reincarnation would be found after his death, in line with centuries-old Tibetan tradition.
We are very glad and happy that we are here today at his place on his 90th birthday, and we pray that may he continue to live a long and healthy life.
No birthday would be complete without cake, not even for the Dalai Lama. Samira Hussain, BBC News, Dharamshala.
More news for you in just a couple of minutes. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Bye for now.